So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our participants joining from across the globe, from India to Argentina, from the Philippines to Portugal, from the United States to Lesotho. My name is Sabina Devan, and I'm the President and Executive Director of the Just Jobs Network. It is my pleasure to be your moderator for the entirety of this conference entitled A Better Future for Essential Workers, organized by the Global Deal in cooperation with the Open Society Foundation. So without further ado, it is my great pleasure to welcome Ms. Laurence Boone, who is OECD Deputy Secretary General, Chief Economist, and G20 Finance Deputy. She will be delivering the welcome address. Thanks so much, Laurence. Good to have you here.
Thank you, Sabina. It's my pleasure to be here, and thanks for the invitation. So, dear ministers and distinguished speakers and participants, I'm very pleased to welcome you to this conference on how to shape a better future for essential workers, which is organized by the Global Deal in cooperation, as you were saying, Sabina, with Open Society Foundations. And over the course of the next 2 days, we will discuss the critical role both formal and informal essential workers are playing or have been playing and continue to play in the face of the pandemic, and also how social dialogue can shape solutions that would ensure decent working conditions for absolutely all workers. As you all know, the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the extent to which the world depends on those workers who kept working during the pandemic to deliver essential goods and services, even when this meant exposure to infection of the virus. The pandemic has also made it clear that many of these essential workers are employed in jobs that are low paid, have demanding working conditions, and are often insecure and in non-standard contracts with limited access to social protection. If we just take the US as an example, millions of cashiers, food preparation workers, home care aides, they earn only $11 to $12 an hour when the average wage in the US is about $25 an hour. And out of 44 million frontline workers in the US, 1 in 4 have difficulties in affording basic household expenses. According to OECD research, which was based on a survey run in 2020, frontline workers in European countries were twice as likely to fear to be out of a job within the next 3 months compared to workers who are able to do telework. So it's essential that a better recognition of the contribution these workers make to our economies happen, because it will not only improve job quality for frontline workers, but it will also increase resilience against new shocks. And we think that improving working conditions for essential workers will tackle structural weaknesses such as labor shortages, and we've heard a lot about this recently, high labor turnover, and also intense work pressure. So the COVID-19 crisis has taught us, I think, that essential workers need more than just applause. And as workers across many OECD countries have left their jobs in search of better pay and conditions, obviously we have nowhere seen anything like the Great Resignation talked about in the US, more evident than among the essential workers who carried us through the lockdowns. Strengthening or bringing better working conditions and better pay to these workers will strengthen the capacity of key sectors and occupation to withstand future shocks, and it will also strengthen the quality of services delivered. Now, there's no better place than the Global Deal to talk about this and to talk about how social dialogue can help to improve working conditions of essential workers in a number of ways. The effective social dialogue would provide government and businesses with a counterpart that they can credibly engage with. When we give essential workers a collective voice, when we include them and their representatives into the policy discussion, the social dialogue ensures that policy decisions and measures are taken with them and not for them. And that can help reach solutions that are fair and balanced, but also practical and pragmatic, and take the reality of the workplace into full account. And social dialogues, and we've seen this in many instances, also helps with policy implementation. Measures are implemented more easily and much better if they are the result of negotiated compromises and receive broad support by the stakeholders involved. And since we were discussing about how to be concrete, let me give you one example of how social dialogue can deliver benefits for all. And that's looking at the experience of tripartite committees and wage boards in setting pay for vulnerable workers. Uruguay, which is a partner to the Global Deal, has used such tripartite wage boards to determine wages for domestic workers, and that has helped to reduce poverty among domestic workers in Uruguay from 30% in 2006 to 14% in 2017. And it has also increased social security registrations by 75%, which is very sizable. So I think the conference will help us share many more examples of how social dialogue has been used to reach good results for essential workers during the pandemic. And I would like to encourage participants to reflect on how these good practices can be sustained beyond the pandemics, and on how you can mobilize social dialogue to respond to the needs of essential workers, whether it's in your country or organization. And with that, I think I've reached the limit of my 5 minutes. So I wish everyone a very productive conference, and I'm very much looking forward to the debate. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for those insightful remarks, Laurence. The importance of essential workers in creating more resilient economies and societies, and the centrality of social dialogue was something that your remarks brought out very well. And against the backdrop of your comments, it is worth reiterating that essential workers, as defined for the purpose of this conference, are not only the frontline health and emergency workers, but also the many street vendors, the garbage collectors, the delivery personnel, formal and informal, the many workers that kept our economies, our societies, our businesses running through the pandemic and beyond. Our express purpose for coming here today is, with representation from a wide range of stakeholders, including multilaterals, governments, trade unions, businesses, and civil society. Our express purpose today is to collectively think about how, in the aftermath of the pandemic, we can build and rebuild economic and social systems that better recognize the many contributions of these workers. Because as we just heard, it is too often that these workers and their contributions are invisible. Their workers are these workers who we are talking about as essential and who are essential, their compensation does often not reflect the value that they bring to our societies, our economies. So the task before us today is to really use this window of opportunity that the pandemic has opened to find solutions on how to rectify the current status quo and to work with essential workers in empowering them and creating greater empowerment. It is to work with businesses to harness the productive potential of all workers and to leverage social dialogue to create a more just world of work. So it is my real privilege to now segue into the first panel that we have today to discuss these issues, to specifically hone in on the issue of fair pay and decent working conditions for essential workers. We have 5 esteemed panelists. First, we have Richard Lochhead, who is the Minister for Just Transition, Employment and Fair Work in Scotland. We have Mark Mittelhauser, Associate Deputy Undersecretary for International Affairs from the United States. We have Sharon Burrow, General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation. We have Osa Domey, who is the Head of Sustainability at Axfood. And we have Janvi Deve, who's the International Coordinator at HomeNet International. So welcome to all of the esteemed panelists. We're really looking forward to a very stimulating discussion on this very important topic. So Mark, let's just jump right in. I'm going to ask you the first question. So the new US administration is known as a supporter of collective voice and fair pay for workers. Can you tell us more about the Empower initiative? What does it do and how does it foster social dialogue and collective bargaining domestically and globally?
Of course, thanks Sabina, and hello to everyone. And I want to thank, first of all, the Global Deal and OSF for focusing on such an important set of issues today. And it's a pleasure for me to be part of this conversation with such a great group of fellow panelists. Sabina, I appreciate the question about the Empower initiative, which for those of you who aren't familiar with it, stands for the Multilateral Partnership for Organizing, Worker Empowerment and Rights. And the goal of Empower is to empower workers and to strengthen freedom of association and collective bargaining around the world with a combination of technical assistance, research, coordinated action, and strategic communications. And I really think at its core, Empower is about helping vulnerable workers to have a stronger voice in their workplaces and in their communities, and in so doing to strengthen social dialogue and to improve livelihoods. The initiative was announced back in December by US Labor Secretary Marty Walsh at an event on the margins of President Biden's Global Summit for Democracy. And I think this context is important because to the Biden administration, workplace democracy is essential to any vibrant functioning democracy because democratic trade unions provide workers a voice in the workplace, the community, and in the political system. And I'm very pleased to say also with Sharon on this panel that Empower was launched in partnership with the International Trade Union Confederation, the AFL-CIO, the Solidarity Center, and other trade union and worker organizations. And the launch also included ILO Director General Ryder, who led a discussion with government representatives from Mexico, Germany, and Argentina. I think in my view, the founding of Empower was motivated by a number of factors, but primarily by the recognition that the global pandemic has been just devastating for millions of workers, both in terms of their lives and their livelihoods, and that urgent measures and an infusion of resources were needed to strengthen workers' resilience and their voices. And yet also our sense was that historically, technical assistance from international donors has not been invested significantly in worker empowerment, and that efforts to promote freedom of association and collective bargaining have been relatively underfunded, certainly in the context of the fact that freedom of association is a key enabling right to other core standards. So to help address this, the US government has made an initial commitment of over $120 million, and that's the largest commitment the US has ever made in this area, and an amount that I should say will increase in future years for funding that will go to projects around the world that strengthen worker organizations and social dialogue, create an enabling environment for workplace democracy, and extend labor law coverage to vulnerable workers in the care economy, the informal economy, and many of the other sectors that we are discussing here today. This commitment at the launch was coupled with a similar investment from the philanthropic community represented by the Forge Coalition and including OSF for programs to empower workers and advance their rights. And we're currently working to invite the participation of other donor governments and organizations to increase the resources going to similar programs and to begin a process of coordinating the implementation and the impact of these programs on the ground. But really the idea of Empower is not just about adequately funding relevant programs. It is to draw on the leverage, the voice, and the resources of all of its partners to create lasting change in workplaces and in communities. So this means coordinating on diplomatic and policy engagement, on trade enforcement, on global campaigns, outreach, and on events like this one. It also means working together to identify strategic higher level priorities in terms of countries and sectors. And it means funding action-oriented research and sharing information to identify what is working and where more engagement is needed. We are currently inviting new partners to join and to make commitments and to take action to advance workers' fundamental rights to organize and bargain collectively, both within their own borders and around the world. And to your point on domestic impact, we very much see Empower as an initiative that is focused both on domestic commitments and international engagement, because clearly the conditions of workers in any one country has an important impact on other workers around the world. And we feel it's important to move forward on both fronts in this regard. In our domestic context, for example, in the United States, Empower is closely aligned with the White House Domestic Task Force on Worker Empowerment and Organizing, which is developing and implementing actions to promote organizing and empower workers within the United States. And I do want to stress that I think similar to Sweden's leadership in launching the global deal to be a global partnership, this initiative is starting under a US government-led effort, but it is intended to be truly multilateral in nature and based on strong partnerships with rotating leadership. The initiative will continue to take shape in coming months as we work with others to determine how it will be governed, put in place a structure for the rotating leadership, and build mechanisms of coordination and dialogue. As we do that, we very much look forward to working and collaborating with the Global Deal, the OECD, the ILO, trade unions, philanthropic organizations, and other crucial partners as we take the next step forward on the initiative. So thank you, and I'd be very happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mark. The US government support for Empower, its partnerships with other philanthropic organizations and drawing in resources from other stakeholders to create lasting change to empower workers by creating an enabling environment, strengthening freedom of association and collective bargaining. Really looking forward to seeing how this initiative unfolds and to seeing the fruits of this initiative. Now it is my pleasure to invite Richard from the Government of Scotland to also come into this conversation. So Richard, the Government of Scotland aims to become a fair work nation by 2025, and you've identified social care, among others, as a sector that is under some strain. What does becoming a fair work nation mean exactly? And what measures are you planning that will better reward the contribution that social care workers make for the well-being of our societies? Over to you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Sabina, and thank you for inviting me. And it's great to join the Global Deal Partnership and to hear from people from all around the world. And I'm speaking to you from Scotland at the moment. Well, to echo some of the comments that you've said already, during the past 2 years, we've certainly found ourselves in the most unprecedented circumstances. And in Scotland, we have a parliament of our own, but we don't have direct legislative powers over employment. That's reserved to the UK government. But we do have a strong focus on fair work, and we do use all the levers that we do have available to us to promote fairer working practices. And that's now a key pillar of our economic strategy for Scotland going forward. And as you say, our vision is for Scotland to be a fair work nation by 2025, where fair work drives success, well-being and prosperity for people, but also businesses as well as the rest of society. So you ask what we mean by fair work, and we set up a Fair Work Convention in Scotland, which of course is our global deal partner, and that describes fair work as work that offers all individuals an effective voice, opportunities, security, fulfillment, and respect in the workplace as well. So it's about balancing the rights and responsibilities of employers and workers, but also generates benefits for individuals as well as the organisations and the rest of society. So we very much appreciate that employers face many challenges as we emerge from the global pandemic, and that's really why that constructive partnership involving governments and all the various agencies and trade unions is very crucial. And I want to just briefly talk about what we're doing in terms of the social care workforce, as you asked about that as well. In Scotland, 85% of our workforce are women, and a significant proportion of the women work part-time and they're low paid. And many of these critical workers in our society, unfortunately, feel undervalued. Yet at the same time, the pandemic and how we responded to that highlighted just how important that particular workforce is to us all. So we've done our best as a government to provide additional support to ensure adequate and consistent provision is put in place for these frontline workers. We don't directly employ them in Scotland. We've got over 1,200 providers of adult social care alone in Scotland, but it's really important that social care workers don't face financial hardship when off ill or self-isolating, as they continue to do so and have been throughout the pandemic. And we introduced in Scotland to help support that the Social Care Staff Support Fund. We also recognise that some individuals working in social care sadly lost their lives through contracting COVID at their workplaces, and we created the Social Care Death and Service Scheme as well to provide financial security to the families of those who were lost. We also established a wellbeing hub to improve the physical and mental health of social care workers in Scotland during the last couple of years. So I think we all recognise the immense gratitude we do owe to Scotland, to our caregivers and those working in the front line throughout the pandemic. And to recognise that, we also provided a £500 thank you payment to health and social care workers in Scotland. So as we emerge from the pandemic, hopefully, and look towards recovery, we're very determined to make sure we do provide a more appropriate funding to ensure all workers who provide direct adult social care receive, for instance, the real living wage that we've introduced in Scotland as well. And we want to go beyond that as well. We've increased the salaries and wage thresholds for social care staff. And we had an increase of over 5% since December 2021, and we have a second increase that begins this month in Scotland as well, which will see a 4.8% increase from December 2021 and nearly a 13% increase since March 2021 in the rates paid to adult social care workers in Scotland. So there's a lot more to be done, and I'll just keep my remarks brief, just to say that beyond recovery, we're absolutely committed to transform social care in Scotland, and we're going to establish a national care service by the end of this 5-year Parliament. That's a monumental transformational development in care in Scotland, the creation of this national care service. So that's all about improving standards, enhancing pay and conditions for workers as well. It will be person-centred, and it will be human rights based as well in terms of the approach to the establishment of a national care service for Scotland. So a lot happening at the moment, but we all have to learn lessons from the pandemic, recognise the value of adult social care workers in our various societies, and make sure they have an adequate reward and that their jobs are valued. And that's hopefully one way in which Scotland is leading the way in the years ahead. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Richard. I appreciated that in your remarks, you talked about the importance of building a constructive partnership that is both cognizant of what workers need, but also taking into consideration that businesses, and particularly small businesses, were hurt during the pandemic, and that social dialogue and partnerships across different stakeholder groups are really essential to kind of building more resilient economies and societies post the pandemic. I also appreciated all of the examples that you provided of the many ways that your government is working to recognize the contributions of social care workers, their physical and mental health, but also looking at the National Care Service that more broadly enhances working conditions for all workers. So to build on this, Sharon, I'd like to bring you into the conversation. And the ITUC has stated that essential workers deserve better recognition for the key role that they play. Can you sort of come in and tell us a little bit more about what trade unions across the world are doing to address this for both formal and informal workers. We've heard from both Mark and Richard about different government interventions. It would be great to have your voice on the role that unions are playing and what's happening as far as unions are concerned.
I'd be very pleased to join the conversation, and thank you for hosting such an important discussion. And Richard, can I say up front, congratulations. Aged care is in fact one of the terribly exposed deficits in our global care environment. And along with childcare, education, and indeed health, we've seen just how dramatic the impact is of underfunding care. First of all, of course, it's a sector where women predominate. It's also a low-paid sector. And, of course, it's a sector, as I'm sure, my sister from StreetNet will tell you, is in fact one of the sectors most likely to be informal in terms of the world of work where care is privatised. But it's also the foundations of our resilience as societies. If you actually think about any manner of global shock, if it's a personal shock, an illness in the family, children who need special care, if it's an economic shock nationally or globally, if it's indeed a health shock or ongoing environmental shocks from extreme weather events, then we know that without care, then our fabric, the very fabric of our society is shattered. There are also good jobs in care, because while women dominate the sector, they are jobs of which we're very proud to take part in. I started my own working life as a teacher, and I was a very proud member of the teaching service in my own country. I often wonder how on earth I decided not to be a teacher, but opportunity arose and one day I stepped out and the rest is history. But I think the pandemic showed us that along with healthcare workers and other essential service workers, when children were homeschooled, how much people appreciated the fact that teachers actually found a way to support education online, but how much they were missed by parents. And we saw, of course, the lack of capacity for too many parents to work online when they didn't have childcare. And then we saw the tragedy of older people in many countries in terrible situations, the most vulnerable. So I would have to say to you that essential workers in the care economy are absolutely at the centre of the dignity of decent work and the dignity of our social or public services. But we need to be careful about how much we do value them, because they will tell you themselves that thank you is not enough. We are seeing people leaving these professions because they indeed can't, they feel like they can't deal with the extra pressure, the lack of low pay when they have to, the lack of pay and the low paid outcomes when they have to feed their own families. And of course, the capacity, the lack of capacity for advancement. So whatever the great resignation, as they call it in the US, looks like, you will find many people leaving otherwise jobs they really care about being available for, but simply because they can't keep going. It was a shock to see that for essential workers, even the fundamentals of occupational health and safety were not available at the onset of the pandemic. Indeed, Mark, we very much appreciate the US commitment, but we also appreciate your own work and leadership for the department in regard to occupational health and safety. And let's hope we can see it as a fundamental right coming out of this International Labour Conference. But I want to say three things, basically, about what we have to do to actually create good jobs in the care economy. There are, of course, other essential workers, and I don't want to deny them. They are our transport workers, they're our retail workers, they're people who work in many, many areas of of the economy. And most of these conditions are actually equivalent. But I want to focus on women and care in particular, because I think it really behoves all of us to say, what are we doing? And I'm pleased to say that social dialogue has got us to the point through the UN system where there's a global care alliance. We know that investing in care, you can get, twice as many jobs as you can investing in infrastructure or in renewable energy, as important as those sectors are, and as much as we want jobs growing out of that investment in the transition to a net zero future. But care has to be invested in as part of the future of recovery and resilience. It has to be part of our social protection fabric. We also have to, of course, look to formalise jobs in care, and that will take a minimum living wage and social protection. So social protection, universal social protection that we've all called for with the Global Social Protection Fund is fundamental. And again, social dialogue at the global level has got us to at least have that on the agenda. Now we have to bring it home. It won't be a huge fund like the Global Fund for AIDS or malaria or tuberculosis. It's a layered approach where we have debt relief, where we increase the percentage of existing ODA going to social protection, where there's direct partnerships, where we help with the fiscal space for governments in poorer countries to set up those services. And for workers in the developed economy, social dialogue showed us what we can do when we look at job protection, wage protection, and increased social protection measures through social dialogue. All I will say is that we need to invest in care. We need to invest in good jobs for essential workers. And I remind you in closing that women lost $800 billion of income during the global pandemic. That's the combined GDP of about 98 countries. If we actually want to put a resilience for people, for communities, and for our economies under our future, then we have to invest in care, and that means invest in the social dialogue with the trade unions and, where necessary, communities to make sure they are good jobs with decent wages.
Thank you, Sharon. You brought up several, I think, very critical points. The battle for gender equity continues despite decades of struggle, and particularly the fact that women are disproportionately represented in the care sector that continues to struggle as a sector where the remuneration and the benefits given to workers are not commensurate with the value that these workers bring. I think all of those are very important points. And you also, while focusing your remarks on care workers in particular, also open the window to talk about other forms of, workers in retail and in transport, in delivery. We have new forms of work emerging in the gig economy. I think all of these different forms of work, all of the workers in these different sectors have made very valuable contributions through the pandemic and continue to make valuable contributions post. But they too struggle to be empowered, to be recognized, and their contributions are also and contributions are also not recognized as they should be. So, in that vein, I'd like to now bring in Osa Dome, who, workers and smallholders, so farmers with holding farms in the global agricultural supply chains are often not paid enough to prevent them from facing poverty. We know, for example, in a country like my own in India, that there's a lot of talk about India emerging as a emerging market economy with a growing middle class, but in reality, many people are just one health emergency away from falling back into poverty. And this is certainly true in agricultural supply chains and the workers and the smallholder farmers in agricultural supply chains. So what I'd like to ask you, Osa, is what actions is Axe Food taking to assist these farmers and workers in obtaining living wages? So recognizing the importance of care workers and you know, but also kind of broadening the conversation to bring in other forms of workers in agricultural supply chains, you know, in cultivating and disseminating and distributing food as an essential system for economies and societies. Åsa, over to you. You're on mute, Åsa. You're on mute.
Yes, now we switch
Thank
to
you.
the food sector, which is a very crucial sector, which we all know. And thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to share some of our challenging work with living wage and decent working conditions in the supply chain. The sustainability work in food retail can be described as the ambition to reduce the gap between the consumers and the people working in the supply chain. The retail company can be seen as a type of deputy consumer. The supply chain is very complicated and it's almost impossible for the consumer to check up the production conditions. Therefore, the retail companies must take the responsibility for a decent production conditions. The traditional way of working with social responsibility is that the company has a code of conduct and checks up the compliance with audits on sites. This is necessary, but it's not sufficient. We have to step up and raise the ambitions and go beyond audits. When it comes to living wage, some difficulties that must be taken into consideration is that Axfood seldom buy food directly from farmers and doesn't decide the pay levels in primary production. Another is that Axfood, with a market share of 20% in a country with only 10 million inhabitants, is a small player on the world market. But despite these challenges, of course, Axfood can influence suppliers and put pressure in the right direction. Axfood has adopted a living wage strategy with, in principle, 9 different ways of working. I haven't got time to describe them all. But depending on markets, kind of products and suppliers, different measures must be chosen in different situations. It ranges from sustainability labels, as for example, fair trade, to more advanced activities, such as special projects with suppliers. We believe that the most efficient way towards decent salaries is to support the development of dialogue, trade unions, and collective bargaining. It's very complicated and not so appropriate for us at the end of the supply chain to decide a pay level at the beginning of the supply chain. This way of working, promoting dialogue, is not so easy in a country, for example, as China, which isn't a democracy. But anyhow, our experience is that it's possible to promote social dialogue between employers and employees, even in China. We have worked with raised awareness in training and in cooperation with a company called Quizzer, which has developed a training system where reading tablets are used on the workplaces. In the education, there are different levels for workers and management. In Thailand, where the situation for migrant workers is a problem, we have worked with Quizzer in a similar way. An important goal with this training and dialogue was to support Amphori BCI's employer pays principles in the process of recruiting. Another important strategy is to develop a cooperation with other stakeholders. We wanted to choose supply chains with high risk for low wages and started with a risk analysis with assistance of Oxfam. Based on this analysis, we decided to put special emphasis on production of strawberries in Morocco, rice in Pakistan, and mango in Peru. In Pakistan, we developed a project with Oxfam and SIDA, the Swedish International Development Agency, to improve conditions for rice farmers. The project has been successful with a raised level of education, organizations of farmers in cooperatives, and better prices. The gender perspective has been very important with high participation of women. Not only very important, also very successful. At last, it's also necessary to remember that challenges with decent working conditions and payment not only have to be taken into consideration abroad and outside Europe. When it comes to seasonal work in agriculture, this is an issue also in Sweden. In southern parts of Sweden, there are farms with many seasonal workers summertime. We took an initiative together with X Foundation to develop a standard. It's called IPCL arbetsvillkor, which might be in English, IPCL working conditions. Now, it is a certification used by all Swedish retail companies, and it has improved conditions for example, workers from Romania. It is vital to focus on risk industries and not only on risk countries.
Thank you, Åsa. Was that the last thing that you wanted to say?
Right.
Okay.
This was the last, yes.
Okay, well, wonderful. Thank you so much for really sort of what I appreciated a lot about your remarks, in addition to all the examples you provided, was also the explication of the complexities of supply chains, the fact that there's contracting and subcontracting, and that companies like Axfood don't directly purchase from farmers, and therefore they don't decide the wages for workers on farms, as an example. Nonetheless, these complexities do not absolve companies from bearing responsibility and taking measures in order to improve working conditions through instruments like social dialogue and others that you've mentioned, like the certification that you just talked about. So I really appreciated that point. And I think, you know, we live in a complex world where these kinds of interconnections between countries or changing labor markets, you know, make it difficult. There's increasing precarity in labor markets. And at the same time, we have to be very innovative in the kind of instruments that we come up with in order to improve and recognize and make visible the many contributions of essential workers. So in that vein, you know, another group of workers that are often invisible are home-based workers. They tend to be invisible because they work in isolation, but also because they're not covered by labor laws, and they're often beyond the purview of benefits. So Janvi, if I could bring you into this conversation and to kind of talk about, you know, we've heard about social care workers, we've heard about now workers in agricultural supply chains, but now I'd like to look at sort of home-based workers and hear from you examples of HomeNet International getting better pay and fair treatment for home-based workers that also are often disproportionately women, as we heard earlier. So over to you, Janvi.
Thank you, Sabina. Thank you to Global Deal and OSF for inviting me to this panel. We are a nascent organization, though we are a very old movement, but HomeNet International is a network of home-based worker organizations of 36 affiliates from 20 countries from Africa, Latin America, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. And we collectively represent over 600,000 home-based workers. Sabina, you already mentioned that, and are absolutely right in saying that home-based workers are invisible because they work in isolation and more often are not covered by the labor laws. But they're also invisible because employers benefit by keeping them invisible and work quite hard to ensure that home-based workers continue to stay invisible. Also, I hate to admit that even home-based workers are organized, they're poorly organized as compared to other formal sector workers. A study conducted by ILO in the year 2019 mentions that there are approximately 260 million home-based workers worldwide, And it is quite ironic that we don't have policies protecting this huge section of labor force, which primarily has women. In fact, home-based workers were the first category of informal economy workers to get an ILO convention for them, which is ILO Convention C177, the Homework Convention. But unfortunately, that is not translated into recognition or protecting them. Even though there is low recognition of home-based workers and dearth of policies protecting them, HomeNet International and our movement has worked quite a lot to ensure that home-based workers get better pay and fair treatment. Our efforts have been at local level, national level, regional level, and at global level. At local level, we have two sorts of intervention. The first one is where a cooperative member has intervened directly with brands to get better pay and fair treatment. And the second is an example of a trade union member building tripartite committees for social dialogue. At local level, our affiliate Sadhana in India, which is a cooperative, has negotiated with global brands to provide piece rate matching up to the minimum wages and also include provident fund and employee state insurance within the piece rates. They've found success when working with the global brands, and they are working on negotiations with the domestic brands. The second example is that of our trade union member, the very well-known Self-Employed Women's Association, or SEWA, has built trade-wise tripartite committees. Within home-based workers, they have built several committees like for the garment workers or beadie rollers or kite makers or the incense stick makers, with representatives from employers, workers, and labor department. The tripartite committee meets once a quarter to discuss various issues, including increase in wages and annual and festival bonus. While there are local level committees, SEWA is a national trade union and has ensured that trade committees of different trades are formed to negotiate on wages and better working conditions across the country. While there is dearth of policies for home-based workers, there are few countries where our affiliates have been successful, like in the case of Pakistan, where organizations like Home-Based Workers Women's Federation and HomeNet Pakistan has successfully lobbied for province-level policies in Sindh and Punjab. And now they're working towards policies for home-based workers for all provinces in Pakistan, and also to get legislation for home-based workers. The policy has translated into increased recognition for home-based workers in Pakistan, but also better pay especially for bangle makers. We also have national level efforts made in Thailand, where they've successfully included home-based workers in social protection programs, which is very important at this stage. And HomeNet Southeast Asia is building a regional level campaign for social protection and representing the demands at the ASEAN level. At global level, despite us being a very young global network, we are supporting our affiliates in organizing and joint learning. We specifically have put our efforts in lobbying for home-based workers in supply chains to be recognized and included in EU mandatory due diligence legislation. We organized regional level meetings and sent a platform of demands. While there are many serious gaps in the legislation that has come out, we do see that they have included all stakeholders in the supply chain beyond the factories and have included the garment sector. This is a positive sign, and we will keep working on lobbying for inclusion of home-based workers in legislation that can hold the employers also responsible. We have many such examples, but I think due to paucity of time, I will stop here and give space for other panelists.
Great. Thank you so much, Janvi. I'd like to now actually bring in a question from one of our participants. And the question is that many migrant workers are employed in what is being defined as the essential work sector. Thousands have been impacted prior to, and much more so during the pandemic, in terms of wage theft and other such practices. Is anyone working on solutions that involve compensation, access to justice, relief, etc.? Sharon, if I could throw that question from the audience to you and have you weigh in just a couple of minutes. We are a little short on time, and I know it's a big question to answer in 2 minutes, but if I could bring you in on that.
So in terms of social justice for workers in in all sectors. The ILO Centenary Declaration made it very clear that all workers, irrespective of the employment relationship, have to have fundamental rights, occupational health and safety, an evidence-based minimum wage, a living wage, and some control over maximum hours of work. And that must be married with universal social protection. So, for example, organisations like SEWA with us are looking at how we drive not just those conditions, but also minimum incomes, which will intersect with the social protection system so that everybody has a resilience floor of an income where they need it. So in terms of social justice for all those workers, collective bargaining, social dialogue with collective bargaining outcomes, that's the way to set just wages for skilled workers. But then at all levels, we need those fundamental, the framework of the ILO Centenary Declaration, or the labour protection floor, as we call it.
Great. Thank you, Sharon. Mark, you wanted to come in on this question as well?
I did. Thank you, Sabina. And it's a really important question, and I think one that we're definitely grappling with in the United States. And I think in addition to all of the challenges that migrant workers have in so-called normal times, I mean, right now with all of the enterprises going out of business and with jobs being lost and workers in many cases returning to their countries of origin without access to any justice, it's a problem that we're seeing in the United States and across the world. And one of the things that we're doing domestically about it is really looking at the way that we go forward with labor enforcement to make it more strategic and to understand where the vulnerable workers are. And rather than waiting for complaints to come in, really doing an analysis of where migrant workers are vulnerable to wage theft and other types of abuse, and concentrating our resources there. And also moving forward with new forms of outreach. We have a program I think is kind of innovative, which is the Consular Partnership Program. And our Wage and Hour Division and also our Occupational Safety and Health Administration partner with the consulates from Mexico. We're about to sign agreements with countries in Central America, the Philippines, and really use their access and their outreach to workers to help them to better understand their rights and to understand ways of contacting authorities when they do encounter problems. And obviously this is a global problem. I'm in the International Bureau of the Labor Department, and it's also something that is a top priority for us as we fund technical assistance and engage. We have a program with the ILO in Malaysia, for example, that is really looking at migrant workers and access to justice, and it works with the government, with workers, and with employers to put in lasting solutions. And so this will continue to be a top priority for us internationally as well. And I think Sharon is right that there are all of these abuses in terms of rights, but it's also really, really important to look at social protection and to have social protections in place to support these workers, and when government systems fail, to also engage employers and to see what can be done in those cases to ensure that they have justice as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Richard, if I could turn to you, I mean, we've heard this conversation about setting up a global social protection fund. Can you talk a little bit in that vein about elaborate a little bit on the National Care Service and, how this sort of intersects with creating better remuneration and, fair pay for essential workers, and how this might have cascading effects on other forms of workers that are also essential to the functioning of economies and societies. Can you talk about your experience?
Yeah, thank you. Firstly, we have, of course, a national minimum wage in the UK, but we've adopted something called, of course, the real living wage, which is higher than the national minimum wage. The real living wage is what we feel people do need to be paid to have a decent standard of living, albeit at the moment, clearly the cost of living is rocketing. And I'm sure that many low-paid workers are facing a really tough time with rising energy bills and other bills that they're facing at the moment. So it's a really, really difficult time just now. But what we're doing is trying to address low pay and in-work poverty, which is unfortunately a growing phenomenon as well. Even though people have jobs, they're still facing poverty. By promoting the real living wage and some of the pay increases we've introduced to the social care sector are taking now people working in that sector above the real living wage, which is it's a big step forward, and that's good news. So the answer to your question really is to promote the real living wage and to urge employers to pay that. And because we have put a lot of effort as a government into the care sector, clearly we hope to have more and more people being paid the real living wage across all sectors for essential workers. At the moment in Scotland, over 80% of people have the real living wage, but we've got a campaign underway to keep increasing that percentage going forward.
Janvi, if I could just turn to you, I mean, you talked about the importance of kind of having home-based workers within the purview of labor laws that then also establish fair remuneration for them. Can you talk a little bit about, just in a minute, about what are the one or two essential ancillary policies that women home-based workers in particular need? What should the priority be when it comes to home-based work for women, and not just in terms of labor laws, but ancillary policies?
Right. Thank you, Sabina. So first and foremost is that, home-based worker sector is one of the worst affected sector, not only, within all sectors of work, but also within the informal sector. And 1 in 5 women actually have no work. They've actually been pushed out of work. One of the key reasons, of course, there's, paucity of work, but the other is care work. They have this, unfair burden of care work, and therefore they are they continue to actually leave this work. So we're looking at not just recovery, we're looking at period of no work at all. And therefore, one key policy that we really do require, or a lot of these social protection programs, which includes home-based workers. Currently, whatever we have does not include home-based workers. So that is key if we're talking about just recovery, if we're talking about, actually reducing inequality and work for women. And of course, we're talking about ratification of C177 and policies for home-based workers in the long term.
Great. Thank you for that, Janvi. And Osa, last but not least, I would like to just give you the last word on, you mentioned a lot of good practices that Axe Food is engaging in, and I'm wondering, what can other large companies and in food retail do to support living wages in their global supply chains? Can you outline in a minute or so a couple of best practices that you think apply to businesses in instituting better practices for essential workers? Osa, you're on mute.
Always forget this.
Thank you.
Yes, one thing is to, welcome political initiatives towards social sustainability. And one example is the new proposal for due diligence legislation in the EU. I mean, sometimes there's been a tradition to oppose political initiatives, but really, they help us to reach our sustainability goals. I think this initiative from EU, it could be improved by including also smaller companies actually to sharpen this legislation. Another thing is, of course, to work together with other companies, as my example with a common certification in Sweden for working conditions for migrant workers. And another thing we could do is to, together with other companies, put pressure on governments to raise minimum wages and better legislation for working conditions. I think that has a great potential. And of course, take part in different networks, of course, Global Deal, but others such as Amphora BCI, an ethical trade initiative, ETI, which we have in Sweden and also in some other European countries, because I think that if we work in a network and support each other, we can also cooperate in a better way with other stakeholders, politicians and trade unions and NGOs.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Åsa. And with that, we are out of time, which saves me from having to summarize this incredibly rich and diverse discussion. So Richard, Mark, Sharon, Janvi, Åsa, thank you so much for joining us. And we hope that you'll stay on for the next panel. But thank you so much for being part of this conversation.